Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn about authentication in Laravel, or to be more specific, how to let a user log in and how to let a user log out. Let's jump into the action. Now before we actually go ahead and set up this login form up in the header, let's first go into the database. So in MySQL Workbench, in our Laravel app, in the users table, you can click this button to view all the rows. Let's give ourselves a clean slate and delete all of these users because a few of them were using plain text for the password value. And really, just now that we have our user registration form working and validating the way that we want it to, let's create, sort of a first permanent user that we'll actually use for the remainder of this course. Now, to do that, you could select all of these rows. So I clicked on the first one and then hold down Shift, click on this one. Right click, click delete rows, and then you'd have to click apply and then apply. That would definitely work, but another way, a Laravel way, would just be to go into your command line. So let me open up a secondary command line, and you could just say php artisan migrate :fresh. Now, do not run this command if you have data in the database that you do not want to lose. So this line will just give us a completely fresh empty slate. So I can run that command, and now if I refresh the users table view, awesome, you can see there are 0 rows. So right now, let's go ahead and sign up for our real account, right? So I'll name it Brad. Typed in my email address. I'll just use a password of Cordy. Go ahead and sign up. Cool, so you can see that was successful. Now, if you go back to the homepage URL, our goal right now is to bring this login form to life, right? Because there's this user now. If we refresh the view, you can click this lightning bolt to refresh the current view that you're on, but right, there's this Brad user with a hashed password. So now, how do we actually let the user log in, and then how can we show them a different homepage instead of this guest registration homepage? Right? Instead, we would want to show them, if you go into your HTML templates folder, remember the folder where we're borrowing HTML from, we would want to show them this file. It's called, or this template I should say, that's called home logged in no results. If you open that up, the idea is, they haven't followed any other users yet, but they should see this content, and then also the header should change so that instead of a login form, it now gives them a few options. Now, before we worry about setting up a conditional header and a conditional homepage, let's start simple. Let's bring this login form to life and decide whether the login attempt was successful or a failure, right? Did they actually enter a correct username and password? So our first step to get started on that would be to pay attention to what URL this form posts to. So do this with me. In VS Code, you can press Control P or Command P on Mac and just search for layout.blade.php. So if I just type layout, there it is, push enter. Let's look for the login form. So it's around line number 19. So instead of the action being a hashtag, let's set the action to be /login. Now there's nothing special about this URL. It could be anything. I'm just choosing /login so you and I are on the same page. But let's go ahead and save that. And actually, while we're still here in this file, I'll let you know that we will need to add a CSRF token to this form. So we might as well just add it right now to save a bit of time and frustration. Don't worry, in the next lesson, we can actually talk a little bit about what in the world a CSRF token is. But for now, right inside this opening form, just say @CSRF. Cool, let's go ahead and save this file. And now we need to set up a route for when you send a post request to /login. So you would go into your routes folder, or again, to save you time, you can press Control P or Command P and just search for web.php, right? That's the routes file we want, so you can just push enter. And again, to save typing, you can just copy and paste and duplicate this register line because there you go, duplicate it. We are looking for a post request, not a GET request, right? When the form gets submitted or posted. And this would be / and then instead of register, login. And now the user controller, as of right now, does not contain a method named login, but we can set that up in about 10 seconds. So for the method name, just change this to login. Let's go ahead and save that. And now let's jump into our user controller and create that function. So you can just press Command or Control P, type user controller, jump into that file. So we already have a public method named register, either right above that or right below it. So literally right above this word public, I would just create a login method. So I'd say public function. I'm making up a name of login, parentheses, curly brackets. In these parentheses, let's add a parameter of uppercase request and then $lowercase request. Inside the body of our function, let's make up a name. I'll make up a name of incoming fields equals, and then we're going to use our lowercase request and call the validate method. Be sure to end that with a semicolon. In these parentheses, we give it an array. You can drop down. So really all I'm going to check for is that neither of these fields was left blank, right? They are both required. If you leave one of them empty, there's no sense in us even attempting to log in that user, right? We know that would be a failed login. So we want to set them to required, so colon. And if you go into the Blade template, you can see that this input, the name value is what matters here, right? In terms of processing the incoming post request. So it has a name of login username. So that's what we would type here, right? Login username equals greater than, when you're building an associative array or spelling out an associative array, the value would just be required, comma, and then we would say, quotes, login password, that's the name of the password field, equals greater than required. Cool. Now below this line, let's just use incoming fields, this username and password, to try to log in. Let's actually set up the skeleton for an if-else block. So if, parentheses, curly brackets, and then after those curly brackets, else, curly brackets. For the condition, Laravel has a universally available function. So you just call auth. We don't need to import the namespace. It's just globally available. It's a helper function. So we call auth, parentheses to call it, and then that's going to return an object, and then we're going to look inside the object that it returns to call a method. So dash greater than to call a method. The name of the method that we want is attempt. Now, you give attempt a username and password or an email address and a password, and it will compare the user's attempted password with the hashed value in the database. And then if it's a match, if it's successful, this will return true. If it's not, it will return false. Now in these parentheses, we give it an array, and we just spell out an associative array. So I'm going to say quotes username, and then equals greater than to give it a value. And the value would just be whatever value is inside our array here. So $, incoming fields, square brackets to look inside that array, quotes, login username. Okay, and then in between the two closing square brackets, comma, right, we're building out an associative array that has another label of password in addition to just username. So quotes, password, equals greater than, and then incoming fields, square brackets to look inside that array, and the label, so quotes, is login password. Cool. Now in the if block, if that attempt is successful, let's just say return a string of text that says congrats with 3 exclamations. If it fails, let's just say return, the word sorry with 3 exclamations, semicolon. Let's go ahead and save this and test it out. Back in the browser, absolutely do be sure to refresh or reload the page so that your login form is actually pointing towards the correct URL. But once we refresh, if you leave either of the fields blank, it's just going to redirect you back to this page, right? Because the validation failed. But if the validation passes, right? If you don't leave them empty, but you fail the values on purpose, you sign in, you see sorry with 3 exclamations. But if I go back, if I actually log in with my correct values, so Brad and Cordy, let me zoom out a little bit. And if I attempt to click sign in, awesome, we see congrats. Now, instead of just returning a simple string of text that says congrats or sorry, we would actually want to log them in if it's successful. Let me show you how to do that right now. So back in our user controller, we can actually temporarily leave the return congrats, but in that if block, just right above return, so right here, in addition, let's say $request, right? So Laravel is giving us this variable. It has all sorts of information about the incoming request. We're going to look inside that object with dash greater than and call a method of session. So parentheses to call that. That is going to return an object. We can look inside the object that it returns to call a method. So dash greater than, and the method we want to call is regenerate, parentheses to call it, semicolon. Now, don't worry, I don't expect this line to make perfect sense, but as soon as you see in the web browser, in Google Chrome, what it does, I think it'll all make sense. So go ahead and save this file, and now do this with me. Go back to your home page. So I'll click the back button, refresh the home page, and perform a successful login once again. So Brad, QWERTY. If I sign in, congrats. But here's the important part. So you might be wondering, well, what in the world did that session regenerate method do? Check this out. I want you to right click either on this page and choose inspect, or you can even just go back to the home page and right click and choose inspect. But I want you to open up your Google Chrome DevTools. In the DevTool window that opens, instead of selecting the Elements tab that it goes to by default, I want you to look for the tab up here that's named Application. So click onto the Application tab, and then on this left-hand side of the screen, I want you to click on Cookies, okay, and then find the domain that we're working with, so either localhost :8000, or in my case, 127.0.0.1 :8000. If you click on that, aha, there is a cookie named Laravel_session. And if you click on it, you can see the value is quite long, but this value is what proves to the Laravel server that we are the user that we just logged in with. And this is persistent. This is why this is so cool. So if you go back in the browser and refresh, even if you refresh 1,000,000 times, that cookie still exists. And the way that cookies work, in case you're unfamiliar with cookies, is they automatically get sent along from the browser to the server on every single request. Just automatically. It doesn't need to be programmed. That's just what web browsers do. They send along all cookies for a specific domain that they're visiting. So in other words, when we call this function, we're essentially saying that if the user provided us a correct username and password, cool. Give them a session value, tell their browser to store it in a cookie, and then that way that browser is going to send us back that cookie on every incoming request, so that way the server can trust that that visitor is who they just proved that they are 10 seconds ago. Here's why this is so cool. With this value in our cookie, it's very easy now to recognize that this visitor is logged in. So instead of this guest homepage, we would show them that template we looked at just a moment ago, right? So in HTML templates, the files that we're borrowing code from, we would show them this template instead once they're logged in. And we would also want to conditionally change the header, right? So if you're logged in, you don't need to see the login form. It makes sense to see this content instead. Let's actually set up the conditional header first before we worry about showing a different homepage content down here. So to work on this area, we would just jump into our layout blade template. So layout.blade.php. And check this out. Watch how easy Laravel and Blade makes it to do one thing if you're logged in and a totally separate thing if you're logged out. So for me, it's around line 18 where I see this heading level 4, and then that's where the form starts. Right before the form starts, let's use a directive. So @auth. And actually, even without the auth symbol, in VS Code, if you're using that same Blade extension that I'm using, you can just type the word auth, and then it should auto-suggest this, and you can just press tab. It's going to give you this. Cool. So we have auth and then end auth, but if we add in an @else, this is really cool. So now anything we add here, this will appear if you're logged in. Anything we add here will only appear if you're a guest or if you're not logged in. So as you might have guessed, let's just move this entire form bit of HTML to live underneath the else, right? So only guests should see that. So I would begin selecting from the start of the form tag, just hold shift and click to the end of the form tag, cut that into your clipboard, and then just paste it right here below the else line. Okay? Now, in terms of what should go here, if you are logged in, well, again, I want you to borrow code from the HTML templates folder, the folder that we're borrowing HTML from. So here's a totally different application, and the file that I want you to borrow code from is home logged in no results.html. If you open up that file, I want you to begin selecting from line 19. So it's a div that has a class of flex row. So select from 19 down to line 27. So 19 to 27, just copy that into your clipboard. Back in our Laravel Blade file, under the auth directive right here, just paste it in. You can go ahead and hit save. And now back in the browser, if you refresh, awesome. Because our browser sent along that cookie to the server recognizes, hey, this is a user that has proved that they are who they say they are. They are logged in, right? Quote unquote logged in. So they received this header. But if you visited this same exact URL in a totally different browser or an incognito window, so instead of Chrome, here is Mozilla Firefox. If I visit that same URL, let me resize the window a little bit here, but awesome, you can see I get the guest header. Cool, let's take things one step further now. So let's actually only show guests or users that are not logged in this content, but if you're logged in, we would want to show them this content. This is a little bit trickier because that is not directly controlled from within our layout_blade.php file. Right, remember our layout file just has this slot area, and then it's the actual specific template for a URL that would control this main content area. So here's what I'm going to do. Let's create a method on our user controller called showCorrectHomepage, and its job will be to determine, hey, should we serve up this blade template or a new blade template that will look like this? So do this with me. Go into your web.php file. And remember, we had this route for the homepage, the just slash URL. Instead of example controller, let's change this to user controller. And then instead of homepage, let's call it show correct homepage. Go ahead and save that. And then let's just go into our user controller and create a method with that name. So I would just create a brand new function, public function show correct homepage. I'm just making up that name. In the body of our function, we want to check to see if the current user is logged in or not. So here's how we do that. We call the globally available helper function of auth. That gives us an object. We're going to call a method on it of check. So this will return true or false depending on whether you're logged in or not. So let's actually just use that as our true or false value for an if-else statement. So you can just copy that into your clipboard, say if parentheses, curly brackets, else curly brackets. For the condition, just paste that in. Cool. So if you are logged in, let's just return a string of text that says you are logged in, semicolon, else, otherwise, just return the view, semicolon, and the name of the view is homepage. Right, we have that view called homepage.blade.php. Cool, so let's go ahead and save that. Now if you refresh where you're logged in, you just see you are logged in. But if you refresh in Firefox, you still see the exact same template. Awesome. So now all we need to do is set up this new template. Watch how easy this is. Just go into your resources folder, in the views folder, and create a new file. And again, you could name it anything, but I'll name it homepage-feed.blade.php. In this file, let's use our X layout component like this. So you want matching, opening and closing tags that look like an HTML element. And then in the middle, that's where the slot content goes. Remember, we're borrowing from home logged in, no results. Well, if you scroll down a little bit, right after you see header ends here and right before you see footer begins here, all this content in the middle, so from line 32 to 37, just copy that in VS Code. In between here, just paste it in, hit save. Okay, now let's actually use this brand new template that we just created. So back in user controller, if you are logged in, we don't just want to return a string of text that says you are logged in. What we want to return is call the view function, semicolon, and just the template was named homepage-feed. You can go ahead and hit save. And if you refresh in the browser where you're logged in, awesome. If you refresh in Firefox, you still see the guest page. Really quick, before we end this lesson, let's have this actually say your specific username that you're logged in with instead of just, username. So go into that new Blade file, right? Homepage-feed.blade.php. Instead of the hard-coded username value here, we can just, have double curly brackets for something dynamic. Call the globally available auth function. It's going to give us a method. On that, call the user method. That's an object. Look inside that for the property. So not a method, but just a property of username. So no parentheses to call it. It's just a property. But if you save that and refresh, awesome. You should see your username right here. Where do we go from here? Well, in our next lesson, we're going to bring the sign out button to life. I think it'll be really cool to be able to click that and see the homepage and the header immediately change. Also, we'll learn how to redirect to a different URL so that you wouldn't just stay on the slash, the awkward slash login screen where it says, congrats, you're logged in. So we'll learn how to redirect to any URL you want to. We'll also learn how to display a flash message when you're redirecting a user to a different URL. So let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you in the next lesson.